In the dusty frontier town of Coopersville, a widowed woman was about to make a purchase that would nearly destroy everything. What started as a desperate bid for financial independence took a horrifying turn when she came face to face with something the miners had died to keep buried. Margaret Maggie, Ellison wasn't your typical frontier prospector. For 32 years, she had spent her life surviving the harsh realities of the American West, daughter of a failed homesteader, widow of a fever victim, known for her stubborn defiance and refusal to accept the limitations society placed on women. When she acquired Ash Hollow Mine for 15 cents at a county auction, ignoring every warning from haunted survivors and the sheriff himself, she had no idea she was becoming the key to unleashing an ancient hunger that had slumbered beneath the mountain for millennia. Maggie's determination to prove herself would lead to a desperate battle between human ambition and something that existed long before humanity walked the earth. What began as a quest for fortune and recognition would become a fight for survival and redemption. The town of Coopersville would never be the same after learning that some doors, once opened, require sacrifice to close again, and that the bravest choice isn't always pushing forward, but knowing when to turn back. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra, special for you. The hammer came down with a crack that echoed through the dusty county courthouse like a gunshot. Margaret Ellison felt every eye in the room turn toward her, though she kept her gaze fixed on Sheriff Eli Cartwright's weathered face. His expression remained carefully blank, but something flickered behind his eyes, something that might have been pity or perhaps warning. "Sold," he said, his voice flat and deliberate, "to Miss Ellison. 15 cents. A ripple of laughter spread through the crowd of men gathered in the sweltering room. Maggie felt heat rise in her cheeks, but she refused to look away from the sheriff. She had learned long ago that showing weakness to these frontier men was the same as bleeding in front of wolves. They would circle and they would feast. 15 cents for a collapsed mine, someone muttered behind her. "Woman's got more hope than sense." "Got no sense at all, you ask me," another voice replied. "That place has been sealed up for 3 years. Ain't nothing down there but broken timber and dead men's dreams." Maggie straightened her shoulders and moved through the crowd toward the makeshift podium where Sheriff Cartwright stood. The men parted for her, some with amused grins, others with expressions she couldn't quite read. As she approached, she noticed Cartwright's jaw working, as if he were chewing on words he couldn't quite bring himself to say. "The deed." "Sheriff," Maggie said, keeping her voice steady and clear. Cartwright reached beneath the podium and produced a yellowed document, its edges worn and water-stained. He held it for a moment, his thumb tracing the official seal pressed into the paper. When he finally looked up at Maggie, his eyes held something she hadn't expected. Not contempt or amusement, but a deep, bone-weary sadness. "Miss Ellison," he began, his voice dropping low enough that only she could hear. "Are you certain about this?" "I am. There are other claims. Better claims. I could direct you to— I want this one." Maggie extended her hand, palm up. "The auction was legal and proper. The deed is mine." For a long moment, Cartwright simply stared at her. Then, with obvious reluctance, he placed the document in her hand. The paper felt strangely cold against her skin, despite the oppressive heat of the August afternoon. "Ash Hollow Mine," he said quietly. "That's what they called it before the collapse. Now most folks just call it the Devil's Purse." He paused, then added even more softly, "Empty but never letting go." Before Maggie could ask what he meant, a commotion erupted near the courthouse doors. The crowd shifted and muttered as a man pushed his way through, his movements sharp and desperate. Maggie recognized him immediately. Thomas Hanlon, though everyone called him Red for the rust-colored beard that covered half his face. He'd been a fixture at the town saloon for as long as she'd been in Coopersville. Always hunched over a whiskey glass, always alone. "You can't let her take it," Red said, his voice carrying the rough edge of a man who spent more time with liquor than conversation. "Cartwright, you know what's out there. You know what they found." The sheriff's expression hardened. That's enough, Red. The auction's over. The property is sold. She don't know, Red insisted, his bloodshot eyes fixing on Maggie with an intensity that made her skin crawl. She don't know what they were doing down there. What they died protecting. Protecting. Maggie found her voice, despite the unease creeping up her spine. They were miners. They died in a collapse. That's what happens in unsafe mines. Red let out a sound that might have been a laugh or a sob. Unsafe. That's one word for it. He took a step closer, and Maggie caught the smell of whiskey and something else, something metallic and bitter. You think they were digging for gold? You think that's why 23 men died in one night? Red! Sheriff Cartwright's voice cracked like a whip. Go home, sleep it off. But Red wasn't finished. He moved closer to Maggie, his hands shaking as he grabbed the edge of the podium. They weren't mining, miss. They were guarding, keeping something in. And when the collapse came, it wasn't no accident. They brought those tunnels down themselves, buried it all, sealed it up. You go digging around out there, you might find what they died to keep hidden. 2 men from the crowd moved forward and took Red by the arms, pulling him away despite his protests. As they dragged him toward the door, he called back over his shoulder, his voice breaking with something that sounded like genuine terror. Don't go down there after dark, Miss Ellison. And if you hear your name called from the shaft, don't answer. Whatever's calling ain't human, and it ain't friendly. The doors swung shut behind him, leaving an uncomfortable silence in his wake. Maggie stood frozen, the deed clutched in her hand, feeling the weight of dozens of stairs pressing against her back. When she finally turned to face the crowd, she saw a mixture of expressions. Mockery, yes, but also something else. Several men wouldn't meet her eyes. Others had gone pale. A younger man stepped forward from the back of the room, his clean-shaven face and pressed shirt marking him as one of the town's merchants rather than a miner or rancher. Jonas Mallory, she remembered. He worked at the general store. Don't let Red scare you, Miss Ellison, Jonas said with a smile that seemed forced. He's been telling tales about that mine since the collapse. Truth is, he was one of the last men to work there before it went down. Some say the experience broke something in his mind. And what do you say, Mr. Mallory? Maggie asked. Jonas's smile faltered slightly. I say a collapsed mine is just a collapsed mine. Could be something valuable still down there, could be nothing. But it's yours now, and that makes you braver than most folks here. Man or woman? Maggie nodded her thanks, though she noticed Jonas's eyes darting toward the courthouse doors, as if making sure Red was truly gone. She rolled up the deed and tucked it carefully into her worn leather satchel. The laughter had died away now, replaced by a tense quiet that made the August heat feel even more oppressive. Sheriff Cartwright cleared his throat. That concludes today's auction. Thank you all for coming. As the crowd began to disperse, Maggie felt a hand on her arm. She turned to find Cartwright standing close, his voice barely above a whisper. I can't stop you from going out there, he said. The land is yours, legal and binding. But, Miss Ellison, if you take my advice, you'll leave Ash Hollow alone. Some things are better left buried. I've heard enough warnings for one day, Sheriff, then hear one more. His grip tightened slightly on her arm. 3 years ago, I helped collapse that mine myself. I was there when we sealed the main shaft. I saw what the miners had done in those final hours, the way they'd destroyed their own tunnels from the inside. And I saw what they'd scratched into the walls. He paused, his eyes searching hers. They wrote prayers, Miss Ellison. Every man who died down there spent his last moments begging God to keep something contained. Maggie pulled her arm free, though her heart was hammering now. Thank you for the deed, Sheriff. She walked out of the courthouse into the blazing afternoon sun, her boots echoing on the wooden steps. Behind her, she heard the murmur of voices starting up again, speculation and judgment flowing freely now that she was gone. Let them talk. Let them laugh. She'd been poor long enough. Her husband was dead, her farm was failing, and the frontier had proven itself to be exactly as merciless as everyone had warned. But now she had something. A claim, a chance, even if it was a collapsed mine that no one else would touch. Maggie untied her horse from the hitching post and mounted up, the deed pressing against her side like a promise or a threat. As she turned the animal toward the edge of town, she saw Red Hanlon sitting on the steps of the saloon, his head in his hands. For just a moment their eyes met. He mouthed two words, "Don't go." Then he turned away, reaching for the bottle beside him. Maggie urged her horse forward and didn't look back. The mountains rose like broken teeth against the evening sky, their peaks casting long shadows across the valley. Maggie had been riding for 3 hours, following the crude map the county clerk had sketched for her, and with each mile the landscape grew more desolate. Trees became sparse and twisted, their branches reaching toward the sky like skeletal hands. The grass turned from green to yellow, to bare earth scarred by old wagon tracks and erosion. Her horse, a sturdy mare named Bella, grew increasingly nervous as they climbed the final ridge. The animal's ears kept swiveling backward, and twice she tried to turn around, forcing Maggie to use firm pressure with her knees to keep them moving forward. "Easy, girl," Maggie murmured, though her own unease was growing with every step. "It's just an old mine, nothing to fear from timber and stone." But as they crested the ridge and Ash Hollow came into view, Maggie felt her breath catch in her throat. The mining camp sprawled across a shallow basin, tucked against the base of a cliff face that looked like it had been carved with a dull blade. Several wooden structures remained standing, their walls weathered to grey, their windows like empty eye sockets staring into nothing. Rusted equipment lay scattered across the ground, picks, shovels, ore cart rails that disappeared into tangles of dead brush. But what drew Maggie's attention immediately was the mine entrance itself, or rather, what had been the mine entrance. The main shaft had been sealed with a wall of boulders and timber, massive logs driven into the mountainside, and reinforced with stones that must have weighed hundreds of pounds each. It wasn't the hasty work of a natural collapse. This had been deliberate, methodical. The effort it must have taken to move such massive barriers was staggering. Sheriff Cartwright's words echoed in her mind. "I helped collapse that mine myself." Bella whinnied and refused to move closer, her hooves digging into the ground. No amount of urging would convince her to approach the sealed shaft. Finally, Maggie dismounted and tied the horse to a twisted pine tree about 50 yards from the nearest building. The mare immediately turned her back to the camp, facing down the trail they'd just climbed, as if ready to bolt at the first opportunity. "Coward," Maggie whispered, but there was no heat in the word. She felt it too, that instinctive wrongness that made the back of her neck prickle with awareness. The sun was sinking toward the horizon now, painting the sky in shades of orange and red that made the scarred mountainside look like it was bleeding. Maggie forced herself to walk into the camp, her boots crunching on gravel and broken glass. The silence was profound. No birds sang, no insects buzzed. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. She approached the nearest cabin, its door hanging crooked on rusted hinges. Inside, she found the remnants of miners' lives. A toppled chair, tin plates covered in dust, a blanket that had rotted into rags. On the wall, someone had carved initials. JT plus MC 1881. Below it, in fresher cuts, "God forgive us." Maggie backed out of the cabin, her heart pounding. She moved to the next structure, then the next, finding similar scenes of abandonment. Tools left mid-use, clothing scattered as if men had stripped them off in haste. A journal lying open on a bunk, its pages warped by water and time. She picked it up carefully, squinting at the faded ink. May 15th, 1882. Found the vein today. Biggest strike I've ever seen. But something's wrong with it. The rock is warm to the touch, and the sound when we drill. The rest was illegible, water damaged beyond recovery. Maggie flipped through more pages, finding only fragments. Won't stop whispering. "Benjamin says we have to go deeper. Heard my name, but no one was there. Not gold. God help us, it's not gold." The final entry was dated June 3rd, 1882. Written in a shaky hand, so different from the confident script of the early pages. "We're sealing it tonight, all of us. Whatever we found, it can't reach the surface. Better to die here than let it—" The sentence ended mid-thought, trailing off into an illegible scrawl. Maggie closed the journal carefully and slipped it into her satchel. The light was fading fast now, shadows pooling in the corners of the camp like dark water. She should make camp, start a fire, prepare for the night. But something about this place made the thought of staying after dark feel like a very bad idea. She approached the sealed mine entrance, running her hand along the massive timber beams. The wood was still solid, the construction sound despite 3 years of weather. Whoever had done this work had meant for it to last. She pressed her ear against one of the gaps between stones, listening. For a long moment there was nothing. Then, so faint she almost thought she'd imagined it, came a sound like wind moving through a distant tunnel, or perhaps like breathing. Slow, deliberate breathing from something impossibly large. Maggie jerked back, her heart racing. The air near the entrance had a strange quality to it, a metallic tang that reminded her of blood and iron. She'd smelled it in the cabins too, but here it was stronger, almost overwhelming. As she backed away, her boot caught on something half buried in the dirt. She looked down and saw the corner of a metal lantern, its glass broken, its handle bent. She knelt and pulled it free, brushing away 3 years of accumulated soil. The metal was still intact, and when she shook it, she heard the slosh of oil inside. Someone had left this here, fueled and ready, then never came back for it. The sun touched the horizon, and the temperature dropped sharply. Maggie felt the cold seep into her bones, though it was still August. She looked back at Bella, who was pulling frantically at her tether, white-eyed with fear. "All right," Maggie said aloud, her voice sounding small against the vast silence. "All right, we'll camp down the ridge." She started back toward her horse, the lantern still in her hand. As she walked, she passed between 2 of the abandoned cabins. Just as she stepped into the gap, she heard it, a voice so soft it might have been the wind. Margaret. She froze, ice flooding her veins. No one here knew her full name. Everyone in Coopersville called her Maggie or Miss Ellison. Only her late husband had called her Margaret, and he'd been dead for 2 years. "Margaret," the voice came again, drifting from somewhere behind her. From the direction of the sealed mine entrance, slowly, against every instinct screaming at her to run, Maggie turned around. The mine entrance was dark now, just a black mouth in the mountainside. Nothing moved, nothing stirred. But the metallic smell was stronger, and she swore she could feel something watching her from the darkness between those massive stones. Then Bella's terrified scream shattered the silence. Maggie ran. She sprinted back to the horse, fumbling with the tether, her hands shaking so badly she could barely work the knot free. The moment she succeeded, Bella bolted down the trail, and Maggie had to grab the saddle horn and haul herself up onto the running horse's back. They crashed down the mountainside in the gathering darkness, branches whipping at Maggie's face, stones scattering beneath Bella's hooves. Maggie didn't try to slow the horse, didn't try to control their descent. She just held on, her heart hammering, Red Hanlon's warning echoing in her mind. "If you hear your name called from the shaft, don't answer." She hadn't answered. But something in that mountain knew her name. By the time Maggie made it back to Coopersville, the moon was high and the streets were quiet. She left Bella at the livery stable, paying extra for the stable boy to rub her down properly after the hard ride. The boy noticed Maggie's scratched face and torn sleeve, but wisely kept his questions to himself. The Golden Bell Saloon was still open, light and noise spilling from its windows into the dusty street. Maggie had never been inside. Respectable women didn't frequent saloons, but right now she needed voices and people and light. She needed to convince herself that the world was still normal, still rational. She pushed through the doors, and the conversation died immediately. 24 men turned to stare at her, drinks halfway to lips, cards frozen in hands. The piano player's fingers went still on the keys. For a moment no one moved. Then Jonas Mallory stood up from a table near the back, his face registering surprise. "Miss Ellison, is everything... Where's Red Hanlon?" Maggie interrupted, her voice rougher than she'd intended. A grizzled man at the bar jerked his thumb toward the back corner. "Been there since the auction, working on his second bottle." Maggie crossed the room, feeling every eye follow her. Red sat slumped over a corner table, a half-empty whiskey bottle and a dirty glass before him. He didn't look up as she approached, but she saw his shoulders tense. "You knew," she said quietly. "You knew about the voices." Red's hand tightened around his glass. "Went out there already, did you? Couldn't wait even one day. Tell me what happened 3 years ago. Tell me why you're so afraid." For a long moment, Red said nothing. Then he raised his head, and Maggie saw that his eyes were red not just from drink, but from something deeper. Something that looked like it had been there long before today's whiskey. "We found something," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. 200 feet down, Benjamin Thornfield, he was the shift boss. He ordered us to dig deeper into a new vein. Said the rock was different there, warmer, softer. We thought it was our fortune. We thought God had finally smiled on us, poor bastards. He poured himself another drink with shaking hands. But the deeper we went, the stranger things got. The rock, it wasn't right. Had veins running through it that looked almost like blood vessels. And it was warm. Hot even. You could put your hand on it and feel it pulse. Pulse. Maggie felt her stomach tighten, like a heartbeat. Red knocked back his drink in one swallow. And the sounds. Jesus Christ, the sounds. At first we thought it was just the mountains settling. Every mine makes noise. But this was different. This was... He struggled for words. This was deliberate, like something was trying to communicate, or warn us away. Behind Maggie, she heard footsteps. She turned to find Sheriff Cartwright standing there, his face hard as stone. "That's enough, Red." "No." Maggie faced the sheriff. "He's going to tell me the truth. You all know something, and I have a right to know what I bought." Cartwright's jaw worked silently. Then he pulled out a chair and sat down heavily, suddenly looking much older than his years. "Jonas," he called across the room. "Close the doors. What's said here stays here." Jonas moved to comply, and gradually the other men in the saloon gathered closer, forming a loose circle around their table. Maggie realized with a chill that every man there had the same haunted look in his eyes. These weren't just curious townsfolk. These were the survivors. 3 years ago, Cartwright began, Ash Hollow was one of the most productive mines in the territory. Benjamin Thornfield ran it, and he was a good man, careful, smart, the kind of boss who cared about his workers. He paused. But he got ambitious, wanted to dig deeper than anyone had gone before. Said there were riches down there that would make us all wealthy. And were there? Maggie asked. "Oh, yes," Red said bitterly. "There were riches. Veins of mineral we'd never seen before. Beautiful stuff, caught the light like nothing else. We hauled up samples, planned to take them to an assayer. But then..." He trailed off, his eyes going distant. Then the whispers started. A man near the bar finished. We'd be working our shifts and we'd hear voices calling from the deeper tunnels. At first, we thought it was other miners playing tricks. But then we realized the voices were saying things they shouldn't know. Personal things. Dead people's names. Telling and preparing this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Another man spoke up, his voice rough. "My brother died when I was 10. Drowned in a river back east. I hadn't told nobody out here about it. But down in those tunnels, I heard his voice calling me. Heard him clear as day, asking me to come deeper, to come find him. We tried to ignore it," Cartwright continued. "Told ourselves it was just the mountain playing tricks, echoes and such. But then men started disappearing. They'd go down for their shift and never come back up. We'd search the tunnels, find their tools, their lanterns still burning. But no sign of the men themselves." "How many?" Maggie asked, though she wasn't sure she wanted to know. 7, Red said. 7 men vanished in 2 weeks, just gone. Like the mountains swallowed them whole. Benjamin finally ordered the mine closed, Cartwright said. Said we'd seal it up until we figured out what was happening. But the night before we were set to seal it..." He stopped, his face going pale. "Tell her," Jonas said from near the door. The young man looked sick but determined. "She needs to know." Cartwright took a deep breath. "The night before we were set to seal it, Benjamin went down alone. Said he needed to understand what was happening, that he owed it to the men who'd disappeared. 20 of us waited at the entrance. We waited all night. When dawn came, and he still hadn't returned, Red and 5 others volunteered to go find him. Red's hands were shaking so badly now that whiskey slopped over the rim of his glass. "We found him at the deepest point of the main shaft. Found all of them. The 7 who disappeared, and Benjamin. He stopped, struggling. They were working. Still digging. But they didn't respond when we called to them. Didn't even look at us. Just kept digging, their hands bleeding, their tools scraping against the rock. And the rock," one of the rescue party added, his voice breaking. Jesus, God, the rock was moving, breathing. The veins we'd been mining weren't veins at all. They were part of something. Something alive. Something that had been sleeping and we'd woken it up. Maggie felt the room spin slightly. "That's impossible." "We thought so too," Cartwright said grimly. "But Red saw it. They all saw it. Something ancient, something that shouldn't exist." When they tried to pull the miners away, Benjamin finally turned around. The sheriff's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. He wasn't Benjamin anymore. His eyes were wrong, empty, and when he spoke, it wasn't his voice. It was a chorus of voices, all speaking at once. "What did he say?" Maggie asked. Red answered, his voice hollow. "He said, 'We are the kept ones. We guard what sleeps. Join us or seal us in, but do not let it rise.' We ran," another man admitted. "Ran like cowards, left our friends down there. Told the rest of the crew what we'd seen. That night, every miner still above ground made a choice. We went back down into that mine with dynamite and timber. We worked through the night, collapsing tunnels, sealing passages. We brought down the whole damn mountain on top of them." "You killed them," Maggie breathed. "We saved them," Cartwright corrected. "Or maybe we saved ourselves. But those men, they weren't fighting us. When we started the collapse, we could hear them singing, praying like they were grateful." Silence settled over the saloon. Outside, a dog barked, the sound seeming to come from very far away. Finally, Maggie found her voice. "Why didn't you tell me this at the auction?" "Why let me buy it at all?" "Because I was hoping you wouldn't," Cartwright said. "Hoping someone else would bid, someone who'd just leave it alone. But when you were the only one, and the county needed the land off its books," he shook his head, "I thought maybe the 15 cents would make you suspicious. Thought you'd ask more questions before going out there. So now what?" Jonas asked, looking between Maggie and the sheriff. "She owns it legal. She's got a right to do what she wants with the land." "No," Red said, standing abruptly. "No, she doesn't. That mine stays sealed. Has to stay sealed. And if I choose to reopen it?" Maggie asked, though even as she said it, she wasn't sure why she was arguing. After what she'd experienced at Ash Hollow, after hearing these stories, every rational part of her screamed to walk away. But another part, a smaller, quieter part, whispered that maybe they were wrong. Maybe they'd seen what fear and superstition wanted them to see. Maybe there was still gold down there, waiting for someone brave enough or desperate enough to claim it. "If you reopen it," Cartwright said, meeting her eyes, "you do it knowing that every man in this room will refuse to help you. You'll be alone out there. And Miss Ellison, I mean this with all respect, no one should be alone at Ash Hollow. Especially not after dark." Maggie stood, her legs unsteady. "Thank you for your honesty, Sheriff. Gentlemen." She nodded to the room at large. "I need to think." She walked toward the door, but Jonas caught up with her, lowering his voice. "Miss Ellison, don't let them scare you. Yes, something strange happened 3 years ago, but that doesn't mean the mine is worthless. Maybe there's still value there. Maybe you just need to be more careful than they were. Are you volunteering to help me?" Maggie asked. Jonas hesitated, his enthusiasm faltering. I'm not a miner, but I believe in you. I believe you're brave enough to face whatever's out there." Maggie looked at the young man's earnest face and felt a flicker of warmth. At least someone in this town thought she was more than a foolish woman chasing empty dreams. "Thank you, Jonas," she said quietly. "That means more than you know." She left the saloon and walked back to her boarding house through the quiet streets. Above, the stars were bright and cold, indifferent to human concerns. Inside her satchel, the deed to Ash Hollow Mine seemed to pulse with possibility, or perhaps with warning. In her room, Maggie lit a lamp and spread the deed across her small table. She also pulled out the water-damaged journal she'd taken from the camp, examining it more closely. Between the legible entries, she found sketches, crude drawings of tunnels branching deep into the earth. And at the bottom of the final sketch, a single word underlined 3 times. Keep, not gold, not silver, just keep. What had Benjamin Thornfield and his men been keeping? And more importantly, was it still down there, waiting? Maggie lay in bed that night, listening to the sounds of the town settling into sleep. She thought of Red's haunted eyes, of Sheriff Cartwright's weary warning, of the strange breathing sound she'd heard from the sealed mine. She thought of her empty purse, her failing farm, her desperate need to prove herself in this harsh frontier world, and she thought of that voice, calling her name in the darkness, Margaret, tomorrow. She decided she would return to Ash Hollow, but this time she would bring proper tools. This time she would be ready to uncover the truth. Whatever it might be, sleep, when it finally came, brought dreams of tunnels that pulsed like living things, and voices that whispered promises she couldn't quite remember upon waking. 3 days later, Maggie returned to Ash Hollow with a mule loaded with tools, rope, and enough supplies for a week. She'd ignored every warning, every pleading look from the townsfolk who watched her leave Coopersville at dawn. Jonas had offered to come with her, but she'd refused. Whatever lay beneath that mountain, she needed to face it on her own terms. The work was brutal. The massive timbers and boulders that sealed the mine entrance had been placed with the strength of desperate men, and prying them loose required every ounce of Maggie's determination. Her hands blistered, then bled, then calloused. She worked from sunrise to sunset, stopping only to drink water and catch her breath. On the 2nd day, she found the first body. The skeleton lay crushed beneath a timber beam, its ribcage collapsed. Its skull turned toward the darkness, as if even in death it had been watching the depths. The bones were still wrapped in the rotted remnants of mining clothes. Maggie forced herself to search the remains and found a tarnished pocket watch. The inscription read, "To Samuel with love." May fortune smile upon you. Samuel hadn't found fortune. Only death beneath a mountain that other men had brought down upon him. But what made Maggie's hands shake wasn't the corpse itself. It was what Samuel had carved into the timber beam above him, using what must have been his final moments of consciousness. The words were crude, desperate, scratched deep into the wood. "Arrows point down, do not follow." Maggie looked closer and saw what she'd missed before. Carved into every visible timber, scratched into the larger stones, were arrows. Dozens of them, hundreds, all pointing down into the darkness of the mine. Not marking the way out, but marking the way in, warning future explorers which direction led to whatever the miners had died to contain. On the 4th day, she created a gap large enough to squeeze through. The moment the final boulder shifted, a gust of air rushed out from the mine interior. It hit Maggie like a physical blow, carrying that same metallic stench she'd noticed before. But stronger now, concentrated. The smell of old blood and corroded iron and something else. Something organic and rotten that made her gag. But beneath the revulsion, beneath the fear, Maggie felt something else. A pull, an almost magnetic draw toward the darkness beyond the gap she'd created. She stepped back, her heart hammering, and made camp as the sun set. That night she sat by her fire and tried to convince herself to leave, to seal the entrance again and walk away. Her rational mind screamed that she was being reckless, that every sign pointed toward danger, but her desperate mind whispered of gold, of fortune, of vindication, and deep in the night, when the fire had burned low, she heard it again. That voice from the darkness, drifting up through the gap she'd created. "Margaret, we've been waiting for you," she didn't answer. But she didn't run either. When she finally slept, she dreamed of men with empty eyes, singing hymns in the darkness while the mountain breathed around them. Dawn came cold and grey. Maggie stood at the gap in the sealed entrance, lantern in one hand, rope coiled over her shoulder. She'd tied the rope to a sturdy pine tree, giving herself a lifeline back to the surface. The logical part of her brain noted this precaution with grim satisfaction. The rest of her wondered if it would matter. She squeezed through the gap, stones scraping against her shoulders, and dropped into the tunnel beyond. The darkness was absolute. Her lantern carved out a small sphere of light that seemed to push against something thick and resistant. The air was warm, far warmer than it should have been, this deep into a mountain. And it moved. Not wind exactly, but something rhythmic. In, out, like breathing. Maggie forced herself forward, her boots crunching on debris and loose stone. The main tunnel stretched ahead, supported by timbers that groaned under the mountain's weight. She passed abandoned ore carts, their wheels rusted solid. Pickaxes leaned against walls, as if their owners had simply set them down and walked away. Then she found the first journal. It lay on an overturned crate, its leather cover spotted with mold. Maggie opened it carefully, angling it toward her lantern. The handwriting was precise, controlled. Benjamin Thornfield, she realized. The shift boss Red had mentioned. June 1st, 1882. We've reached a depth of 240 feet. The new vein is unlike anything I've encountered in 20 years of mining. The rock is warm to the touch, almost feverish. When we drill into it, I swear, I can feel it pulse against my hand. The men are uneasy, but the potential yield is too great to abandon. She flipped ahead. June 2nd, lost 2 drills today. They simply vanished into the rock as if swallowed. More disturbing, we can hear them still, somewhere deep inside the vein. The grinding sound continues, though no man operates them. Further pages had been torn out. The next legible entry was dated June 3rd. Do not let it rise. We were wrong. So terribly wrong. This isn't a mineral deposit. It's something alive. Something ancient. It knows we're here. It knows our names. God forgive us, it knows our sins. Maggie's hands trembled as she closed the journal. Ahead the tunnel branched into 3 passages, and carved above each entrance, in letters that looked burned rather than chiseled, were the words, kept below, kept below, kept below. She chose the center passage, drawn by an instinct she didn't understand and couldn't resist. The tunnel descended sharply, the timbers becoming fewer, the walls transitioning from excavated stone to something smoother, almost polished, as if something had worn them down through constant contact. And then she heard it, her own voice echoing up from the depths. Turn back, Margaret, please, turn back while you still can. She froze, the hair on her neck standing straight. That was her voice, her exact tone, her inflection. But she hadn't spoken. This isn't real, she whispered. It's just echoes. Just the mountain, her voice agreed from the darkness ahead. Just the mountain breathing. Just the mountain waiting. Maggie pressed forward, her jaw set. She would not be frightened away by tricks of sound and shadow. She would not prove the men of Coopersville right. She would. The tunnel opened into a chamber, and the warmth hit her like a wall. The chamber was roughly circular, perhaps 30 feet across. But what stopped Maggie's breath wasn't its size. It was the evidence of deliberate destruction surrounding her. 3 passages led from this chamber deeper into the mountain. All 3 had been collapsed with precision. Timbers had been burned, then the charred beams used to wedge massive boulders into place. Stone had been piled with almost architectural care, creating barriers that must have taken days to construct, and everywhere, carved into every available surface, were prayers. Lord, have mercy upon our souls. Forgive us for what we've done. Let this be enough. Let it be enough. Maggie moved closer to the nearest collapsed passage. The stones were still warm, radiating heat that made the air shimmer. Between the gaps she could see faint light, not lantern light, something else. Something that pulsed in rhythm with that breathing sound she'd been hearing since she entered the mine. She found more journals scattered around the chamber. Different handwriting, different men, all telling the same story. We thought we were miners. We were trespassers. It showed us things. Beautiful things. Terrible things. Things that never were and things that must never be. The only way to stop it is to starve it. Seal it away. Never let it taste air and light again. And finally, scratched into the stone in what looked like blood. Kept below. Maggie ran her hands over the sealed passages, feeling the heat beneath. Her rational mind catalogued what she was experiencing. Abnormal thermal activity, possibly volcanic, certainly dangerous. But some deeper part of her, some ancient human instinct, recognized what she was really feeling. Hunger. Whatever lay beyond these barriers was hungry. And it had been hungry for a very long time. She should leave. Should seal the entrance behind her, just as the miners had done. Should let this place rest in darkness and silence forever. But instead, Maggie found herself examining the barriers with a prospector's eye, looking for weaknesses, for ways through. The northern passage had shifted slightly over 3 years. The stones had settled, creating a gap near the ceiling. A person could squeeze through if they were determined enough, reckless enough, desperate enough. Maggie stared at that gap for a long time, her lantern casting dancing shadows on the walls. Behind her, retreat beckoned. Ahead, in that pulsing heat and hungry darkness, lay answers or oblivion. She began to climb. The gap was narrower than it looked. Maggie had to push her lantern ahead of her and squeeze through sideways, stone pressing against her chest and back. For one terrifying moment she thought she was stuck, wedged between the barrier and the mountain itself. Then something seemed to give way, and she tumbled through into the passage beyond. The heat was overwhelming, oppressive. Maggie's shirt was already soaked with sweat, and she'd been in this deeper tunnel less than a minute. The walls here weren't stone at all. They were something else, something that looked like rock but felt wrong under her hands, smooth, warm. And when she pressed her palm against it, she felt that pulse again, steady, strong, like a heartbeat. The passage descended steeply, and Maggie moved carefully, one hand on the wall for balance. Her lantern illuminated maybe 10 feet ahead, but she could sense the space opening up beyond her little circle of light. The breathing sound was louder here, unmistakable. And beneath it she heard something else, singing, faint, distant, but unmistakably human voices raised in harmony. The same hymn she'd heard in her dreams, the same desperate prayer she'd seen carved into walls and written in journals. The passage opened into a chamber that shouldn't exist. It was massive. Her lantern couldn't reach the far walls or the ceiling, but she could feel the vast space around her. And everywhere, on every surface, were veins. Not mineral veins. These were wrong, organic. They pulsed with bioluminescent light, casting everything in shades of sickly green and deep crimson. The veins branched and converged like blood vessels in some impossible anatomy, all of them leading downward, deeper, to something at the heart of this chamber. Maggie approached the edge of what she realized was a shaft. A natural chimney that plunged straight down into darkness, so complete even the glowing veins couldn't penetrate it. And from that darkness she felt it, a tension. Something down there was aware of her, was watching her, was waiting to see what she would do. She found Benjamin Thornfield's final journal on a ledge overlooking the shaft. His handwriting had devolved into barely controlled scrawls. It's not from this earth, not from this time. It's been here longer than men, longer than mountains, sleeping, dreaming. We woke it with our drilling, with our greed. And now it knows we exist. It wants to exist with us, to rise, to spread. The others are already gone, taken, changed. They work for it now, singing its songs, preparing the way. I am the last. I will seal these passages. I will bring down the mountain if I must. But I will not let it rise. If you're reading this, stranger, then I failed. Turn back, seal this place. Let no one disturb it. Some things are meant to stay buried. Some hungers are meant to starve. Maggie looked up from the journal and saw them, deep in the walls, embedded in the stone like insects in amber, were the bodies, the missing miners. Not dead, not quite. Their eyes were open, reflecting her lantern light, and their mouths moved in silent song. Lips forming words she couldn't hear but somehow understood. Kept below. Kept below. Kept below. They weren't prisoners. They were guards. The final barrier between this thing and the world above. The veins pulsed brighter, and Maggie felt it then. The pull. The same magnetic draw that had compelled her to enter the mine, to descend, to squeeze through that gap in the barrier. But stronger now. Overwhelming, irresistible. Down there in that infinite darkness, something was offering her everything she'd ever wanted. Wealth beyond measure, power, recognition, a place in the world that no one could deny her. All she had to do was keep going, keep descending, Touch the thing at the heart of the mountain, and let it touch her in return. Maggie took one step toward the shaft, then another. Her rational mind screamed warnings, but they seemed distant, unimportant. The chamber trembled. Stones fell from the ceiling, splashing into the shaft and disappearing into that hungry darkness. The miners in the walls sang louder now, their silent hymn becoming audible. Not a song of worship, a song of warning, of prison bars rattling, of chains beginning to break. Maggie looked down into the shaft and saw it, just for a moment, just a glimpse, something vast, something ancient, something that had been dreaming of the surface world for millennia. And it knew her name. Margaret, it whispered with 1,000 voices. Margaret, we've been waiting for you. Margaret, you will help us rise. The chamber shook again, harder this time. Somewhere behind her, the barrier she'd breached was collapsing. The mine was coming down. Whether from the thing's power or simple structural failure, Maggie didn't know. But she knew, with sudden and terrible clarity, that she had a choice to make, and not much time to make it. The chamber shuddered, and Maggie stumbled backward from the shaft's edge. Her lantern swung wildly, sending shadows dancing across the walls like frantic spirits trying to escape. The miners embedded in the stone sang louder, their voices rising to a crescendo that seemed to vibrate through her bones. She turned to run, but the passage she'd come through was gone. Where there had been stone and an opening, there was now only solid wall, smooth, seamless, as if it had never existed. "No," Maggie whispered, pressing her hands against the rock. "No, no, no." Her fingers found no gap, no irregularity. The mountain had closed around her like a fist. Behind her, the thing in the shaft laughed, not with sound, but with sensation. Amusement rippling through the air like heat waves. The bioluminescent veins pulsed brighter, and the temperature rose another 10 degrees. Maggie's vision swam. The chamber tilted. "Margaret," her dead husband's voice said from the darkness. "Margaret, why did you leave me?" She spun around, and there he was, Thomas, standing on the opposite side of the shaft, whole and healthy, exactly as he'd looked before the fever took him. He smiled at her with that crooked grin she'd loved, and extended his hand. "Come here, Maggie, come to me. We can be together again. You just have to cross over." "You're not real," Maggie said, but her voice cracked. "You're dead. I buried you." "Is death so simple down here?" Thomas asked, tilting his head. "Look around you, love. These men died 3 years ago, yet they still sing, still serve. Death is just another kind of living in this place." Maggie squeezed her eyes shut. "You're not real. You're not real." When she opened them again, Thomas was gone. But someone else stood there now. Sheriff Cartwright, his face grave. "I warned you," he said. "Why didn't you listen? Why do women never listen?" "Because you wanted me to fail," Maggie spat. "All of you. You wanted to watch me break myself on this mountain because it would prove you right. Prove that women don't belong out here chasing fortune." The false Cartwright's face rippled, distorted, became something else. Something with too many eyes and no eyes at all. "Is that what you think? That we warned you out of spite?" "Oh, Margaret, we warned you out of mercy, but mercy means nothing to the hungry." The chamber lurched, and Maggie fell to her knees. Her lantern rolled away, its light guttering. In the sudden dimness, she saw them more clearly. The miners in the walls. Their mouths weren't moving in song anymore. They were screaming, silent, endless screams of men trapped between life and death, between flesh and stone, and they were looking at her. Not with hatred, with pity. "Help me," Maggie whispered. "Please, tell me how to get out." One of them, she, recognized him somehow as Benjamin Thornfield, though his face was twisted and wrong, managed to move his hand, just an inch, just enough to point, not toward any passage or exit, down. He was pointing down into the shaft. "The only way out is through," a voice said, and Maggie realized with horror that it was her own voice, that she was speaking words she didn't choose. The only way to freedom is to fall, to surrender, to join. She clamped her mouth shut, but the words continued anyway, echoing through the chamber, as if the mountain itself had learned to speak with her tongue. Another tremor, larger this time. A crack opened in the ceiling, and dirt rained down. The mine was collapsing in earnest now, the barriers the miners had constructed finally giving way under the thing's pressure, or perhaps under her presence. Perhaps by breaching those barriers, by climbing through that gap, she'd broken the final seal. Perhaps she was the instrument of its release. Maggie crawled toward her lantern, her hands finding familiar tools in the dim light. Her pickaxe, the rope still tied around her waist, though she had no idea where the other end led anymore. And something else, something cold and metallic, dynamite. She'd brought it to clear rubble. 3 sticks packed carefully in her satchel, enough to make a new passage, or enough to bring down what remained of this chamber. Her hands trembled as she pulled them out. The thing in the shaft seemed to sense her intent, because the chamber went suddenly, terribly still. Even the miners stopped their silent screaming. The bioluminescent veins dimmed to almost nothing. "Margaret," the thing whispered, and this time it didn't use any human voice. This was something older than words. "You would bury yourself to stop me. You would die in the dark, alone, forgotten. For what? For people who laughed at you? For a world that gave you nothing but hardship?" "Yes," Maggie said, surprised by the steadiness in her voice. "Because I'm done chasing fortune that costs other people their lives. Because I'm done proving myself by breaking what shouldn't be touched." She began placing the dynamite, working by feel as much as sight. The fuses were long, but not long enough. "Not if she stayed in this chamber. There is no escape," the thing said. "You know this. The passages are sealed. The mountain has claimed you. Then I'll die making sure it claims you too," Maggie replied. She lit the first fuse. The sparks sputtered, caught, began their slow burn toward oblivion. Time moved strangely with the fuses burning. Each second stretched and compressed, elastic and brittle all at once. Maggie lit the second stick, then the third, her hands operating on pure instinct while her mind raced through impossible calculations. The miners had collapsed passages to contain this thing. But they'd had time, coordination, strength in numbers. She had 3 sticks of dynamite, a dying lantern, and a growing certainty that she'd never see daylight again. The thing in the shaft began to move, not rising exactly, but uncurling, shifting. The darkness at the bottom of the shaft began to climb upward, and with it came a sound like continents grinding together. The bioluminescent veins flared brilliant crimson, and the heat became nearly unbearable. Maggie grabbed her pickaxe and began attacking the wall, not randomly, but where she'd entered, where the passage had been before the mountain closed it off. If there was any weakness, any fault line, it would be there. Futile, the thing observed, its voice now a physical presence pressing against her skull. "You struck your bargain when you entered. Your greed called to mine across the stone. We are kindred, you and I, both hungry, both unwilling to accept what we're given." "I'm nothing like you," Maggie snarled, swinging the pickaxe with all her strength. Chips of stone flew, but the wall held. "No. You dismissed every warning, ignored every sign, pushed past every barrier because you wanted more, needed more. That hunger, Margaret, that desperation, that's what I am. That's what I feed on. You weren't just trespassing. You were answering an invitation." The first fuse burned down to half its length. Maybe 30 seconds left. Maggie swung again, and this time something gave way. Not the wall, but something in her understanding. The pickaxe had struck a vein, one of those organic channels pulsing through the stone. And when it broke, she felt it. Pain. Actual pain, as if she'd struck living flesh. The thing shrieked. It was a sound, beyond hearing. It reverberated through the stone, through the air, through her body. The miners in the walls convulsed, their mouths opening wider, their silent screams finding voice at last. And in that moment of the thing's pain and distraction, Maggie saw it. The passage, Not closed after all, concealed, hidden behind a layer of that organic stone, that living rock that was part of the creature itself. She swung again, again. Her shoulders screamed in protest. Her blistered hands tore open and bled, but she kept swinging. The wall began to crack, to peel away, to reveal the darkness of the tunnel beyond. 20 seconds. You cannot contain what has already tasted freedom, the thing said, its voice strained now, angry. You opened the door. I will walk through it whether you live or die. Not through me, Maggie gasped. Not because of me. She swung one final time and the wall shattered. The passage opened before her, narrow and treacherous and filled with falling debris. Behind her, the thing began to rise from the shaft in earnest. She caught a glimpse of it in the flaring light of the veins. Something that had no shape and too many shapes. Something that existed in more dimensions than human eyes could properly see. Beautiful and terrible and utterly alien. 10 seconds. Maggie dove into the passage, her rope trailing behind her. The tunnel was collapsing as she crawled, the mountain coming down in earnest now. Whether from the dynamite or the thing's fury or simple structural failure, she couldn't tell. Didn't matter. She pulled herself forward on her elbows, her knees, her bleeding hands. Behind her, the dynamite detonated. The explosion was muffled by stone and distance, but the shockwave hit her like a physical blow. The tunnel bucked and heaved. She felt the rope around her waist go taut, something pulling her backward toward the chamber. Toward the thing, Maggie screamed and cut the rope with her knife, severing her lifeline. She scrambled forward as the tunnel continued its collapse, barely staying ahead of the falling stone. Timbers splintered. Supports gave way. The mountain was taking back what men had dared to hollow out. Ahead, she saw light. Not lantern light, not bioluminescent veins. Daylight. Actual daylight streaming through cracks in the rubble. She clawed toward it, her vision graying at the edges, her lungs burning from dust and smoke and exertion. The gap was too small. She couldn't fit. But the mountain was still collapsing, and the choice was simple: try and fail, or give up and die. Maggie wedged herself into the gap and pushed with everything she had left. Stone tore at her clothes, scraped her skin raw. For one eternal moment she was stuck, trapped between the dying mine and the open air. Then something gave way, and she spilled out into the afternoon sun. Behind her, the mine entrance collapsed completely. A cloud of dust and debris rolled out across the camp, and deep beneath the ground she heard one final sound. Not a shriek, not a roar, a sigh. Whether of frustration or satisfaction, Maggie would never know. I'm an old woman now, putting these words to paper with hands that still bear the scars of that day. 43 years have passed since I crawled out of Ash Hollow Mine, and not a single one has gone by without me thinking about what I left down there, what I trapped, what I nearly set free. Sheriff Cartwright found me at sunset, collapsed 50 yards from the sealed entrance. I was half dead from exhaustion, blood, and trauma. He lifted me onto his horse without a word, and we rode back to Coopersville in silence. There were no recriminations, no "I told you so." Just his weathered hand steady on my shoulder and his quiet voice saying, "You did what had to be done." Red Hanlon was waiting at the doctor's office. When he saw me, his haunted eyes filled with something I hadn't expected: relief, perhaps even gratitude. He pressed a bottle of whiskey into my bandaged hands and said, "Welcome to the club nobody wants to join." I spent 3 weeks recovering. In that time, the mountain did what mountains do. The collapse was total. The main shaft, the chambers, the tunnels where 23 miners had sung their endless hymns, all buried under thousands of tons of stone and earth. Geologists from the territorial office came to investigate, declared the site a complete loss, and recommended the claim be abandoned. I signed the papers without hesitation. Jonas Mallory visited me once during my recovery. He brought flowers and optimism, talking about other claims, other opportunities. But when he looked at my face and saw what was written there, his enthusiasm faltered. "What did you find down there?" he asked quietly. I couldn't tell him. Couldn't explain what human language wasn't built to describe. So I just said, "Leave it buried, Jonas. Some questions aren't meant to be answered." He left, disappointed. Last I heard, he'd moved to San Francisco, chasing fortune in more civilized pursuits. I hope he found what he was looking for. As for me, I never prospected again. I sold my failed farm and took work as a seamstress, then as a teacher, and finally as the county recorder. Mundane work, honest work. The kind of work that doesn't require you to dig into places that should remain sealed. But I kept the deed, and I kept the journals I'd found, and I kept writing down everything I remembered, because someone needs to know. Someone needs to understand what's beneath Ash Hollow. Should anyone ever be foolish enough to dig there again, the thing I learned in that mountain, the truth that cost me my ambition and nearly cost me my life, is this: some treasures carry a price that gold can't measure. Some fortunes aren't worth the cost of claiming them. And sometimes the bravest thing you can do isn't to push forward, but to turn back. The miners knew this. Benjamin Thornfield and his men understood what I'd been too desperate, too proud to see. They weren't victims of a mine collapse. They were heroes who chose to die rather than let something ancient and hungry reach the surface world. They built a prison with their own bodies and sealed themselves inside it, singing hymns until the end to drown out the whispers that promised them everything. I nearly undid their sacrifice, nearly freed what they died to contain. Sometimes, late at night, I wake with the taste of metal in my mouth and the sound of breathing in my ears. I'll stand at my window, looking toward the mountains, and I'll swear I can see a faint glow on the horizon. The color of bioluminescent veins, pulsing with ancient hunger. And I wonder if the dynamite was enough, if the collapse was complete, if the thing truly is sealed again, or if it's just waiting, biding its time, growing stronger in the dark, while the world above forgets it ever existed. Sheriff Cartwright died 10 years ago. Red Hanlon 5 years after that, finally drowning his memories permanently in a bottle. The other survivors have scattered or passed on. I'm the last one left who remembers, the last one who can warn. So I'm writing this account, and I'm sealing it with instructions that it should only be opened if someone finds Ash Hollow Mine on a deed or a map. If someone stands where I stood, looking at that scarred mountainside and thinking about what might lie beneath. To that person, I say this: leave it alone. I don't care if your land is failing. I don't care if you're desperate for fortune or recognition or proof of your worth. I don't care if everyone in town laughs at you or warns you away or dismisses your dreams. Listen to them. Listen to the fear in their voices and the warnings in their eyes, because I bought a collapsed mine for 15 cents, and I learned why no one else would bid on it. I learned what the miners died protecting. And I learned that some hungers, once awakened, never truly sleep again. The deed to Ash Hollow Mine sits in a lockbox in my study, yellow and brittle with age. Worthless paper documenting worthless land, but I've willed it to the county with strict instructions. Never sell it. Never develop it. Never let anyone disturb what's buried there. Some might call it superstition. The ramblings of an old woman who went into a dangerous mine and came out with her mind broken by fear and trauma. Let them. I know what I saw. I know what I felt. I know what called my name in the darkness and promised me everything I thought I wanted. And I know the terrible truth that cost me my ambition, my dreams, and 43 years of uneasy sleep. The mine isn't empty. It's full of the dead who guard the sleeping. Full of prayers carved in stone and whispered in darkness, full of an ancient hunger that waits with patience beyond human comprehension. I was 32 years old when I crawled out of Ash Hollow. I'm 75 now. In all those years, I've built a modest life. I've helped students learn to read, helped families keep their records, helped a frontier town grow into something resembling civilization. But I'm not proud of any of it the way I might have been, because I know, in my bones, that the most important thing I ever did was that desperate scramble through collapsing tunnels, that frantic placement of dynamite, That choice, in a moment of terror and clarity, to choose the world's safety over my own ambition. I am not a hero. Heroes don't nearly destroy what they're supposed to protect. I am a survivor, and survivors have an obligation to warn. So here is my warning, written in my own hand, witnessed and sealed. Never dig at Ash Hollow. Never disturb the stones that mark its entrance. Never listen if you hear your name called from beneath the mountain, and if you find this account, if you read these words, I beg you to remember, some prices are too high, some questions better left unasked, and some fortunes not worth the cost of claiming. I bought a collapsed mine for 15 cents. It nearly cost me the world. Margaret, Maggie, Ellison. October 17th, 1925, Coopersville County. Western Territory Editor's Note. This document was found among Mrs. Ellison's effects following her death in 1926. The original deed to Ash Hollow Mine was discovered in the lockbox as described, along with several water-damaged journals and a crude map marking the location. Per her wishes, the land remains under county protection, with development permanently prohibited. A small marker was placed at the site in 1930, reading simply, "Here lie 23 brave men. Let them rest. No further mining operations have been attempted at Ash Hollow." This account is preserved in the Coopersville Historical Society archives for historical purposes only. The Society takes no position on the veracity of the supernatural elements described herein. Up next, we have 2 more incredible stories that are waiting for you. Just click the image you want to watch, and it will take you there. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to subscribe. It would mean a lot.